Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Please be sure to like and subscribe. Let's go ahead and dive into what Bishop Barron has to say today.
And still looking at from a comparative perspective, how is the common good's insistence on creating a society that benefits everyone, especially including the most vulnerable, how is that different from a progressive wokist conception of social justice?
Yeah, well, the wokist thing to me is based on an antagonistic social theory. It's us against them, oppressor against oppressed. It's a system of original sin without the possibility of salvation. So we're naming this sort of condition you have. You're an oppressor, and there's no way out of it. There's really no reparation that will ever make that better. And then keeping certain people in a permanent victim status. To my mind, that's not anywhere near encouraging the full flourishing and the attainment of good of the individual. I think that's locking us into a deeply antagonistic social theory. Where, the Catholic social theory is a cooperative one. It wants everybody ultimately to have a greater access to economic success, to family, to religion, to knowledge, to education. That's the goal. And it's not to characterize the society in such a way that we have antagonistic groups all the time at each other's throats, but rather it's a cooperative social theory. And can we get more and more people the opportunity to avail themselves of these great social goods? I think that's the Catholic approach, which to my mind is much healthier.
One of the terms that you use oftentimes in your sermons, you say fellow sinners. Yeah. And every time I hear that, I think just how right that is, and how important that feature of the Catholic anthropology and understanding reality is to recognize that sin is universal. And that oftentimes these political philosophies, including progressivism, will say, yeah, there are sin, but it's in this group or in that group.
That's interesting, actually. I think about that more because, yes, one of the great virtues of Catholic social theory is that it's against a sort of utopianism, that we just make the right, changes, we can produce the perfect society. And progressivism in its earlier form was susceptible to that utopian temptation, right?
Yeah, right.
If we just have enough social, economic, political, cultural change. But see, the wokest thing, I haven't quite thought this way before, is a kind of reversion to, it's not that, it doesn't think society is perfectible, seems to me, that we're just permanently caught in these antagonistic camps. So it's like, it's another type of perversion, not a utopianism. It's again, original sin, but without the hope of salvation. Mm-hmm. Right? So yeah, we're all sinners, and that's a very important thing for social theorists to know. Right? Because it means, that's like, Thomas Sowell has that famous line, isn't about, you can't produce a perfect society. You can address issues and you can ameliorate them. Okay, good. But what's Buckley? Don't immanentize the eschaton.
Yeah, eschaton, yeah.
Right? Because the eschaton it's our earlier conversation, that's something we hope for. That's outside of space and time, ultimately. And if you think, okay, if I elect the right person, I make the right economic adjustments, then we'll produce the eschaton, what happens? Bodies pile up. And we've got tons of evidence of that over the last 150 years, right? People that believe in the perfectibility of the human race are those who produce the most murderous social conditions. Because as Lenin said, not John, but Vladimir in this case, right? Break a few eggs to make an omelet. I mean, so if you want to make the perfect society, well, 1 million or so people or 10 million or so have to die, so be it. Well, of course, that's repugnant. And those who realize we're all sinners, I want them in power. They're much saner people when it comes to social arrangements.
And as a final comparison, how do we distinguish the common good tradition from a kind of generic conservatism in this respect? So the common good tradition embraces what we could call relatively traditional moral and social values. And conservatism seeks to conserve as well, but it seems to be conserving for the sake of conserving. So how do we distinguish sort of that kind of conservatism from the Catholic social thought tradition?
Right. I always distinguish between a kind of Russell Kirk conservatism and a libertarian conservatism. I would subscribe very much to Russell Kirk, that it's a deeply morally informed conservatism and one that's oriented to belief in God. I don't like a sort of libertarian conservatism or or almost like a Nietzschean conservatism, where it's my autonomy and don't tell me what to do. And no, it's not that kind of individualism. The dignity and rights and prerogatives of the individual, that's very important, but not an individualism that has no real concern for the common good and so privileges liberty. I should be able to do what I want. No, Catholic social teaching would say our liberty is circumscribed by moral demand and should be circumscribed by legal constraints when it's appropriate. Because the common good is our focus, not just the expression of my autonomy. So no, I would distance myself from that kind of conservatism.
Is it also fair to say from a Catholic social thought tradition perspective that sometimes it will recognize that social structures do need to be fundamentally changed?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, look at the reforms within capitalism. Go back to the time of Marx, mid-19th century, and you understand the sort of prophetic side of Marx as he's bewailing, the social conditions. Look, from let's say late 19th into the first third of the 20th century, and you've got minimum wage requirements, you've got child labor laws, you've got unionization, you've got antitrust legislation. These are all things that were meant to constrain the market. So it's not just this, kind of all-devouring, limitless, contrivance. So yes, who wouldn't favor those things now?
Right.
Who, in fact, wouldn't see the antitrust thing as something very healthy for a market economy? It makes the market economy better.
Right.
It's not eliminating it. It's making it healthier. Or who would be, let's go back to, a kid could work in a factory from, 6 in the morning until midnight. Well, I mean, no one would hold that because that's going to undermine the integrity of a market economy. So sure, those forms of change were, good, helpful for the common good.
And finally, we'll look at just a few policy areas in a moment. But so much of the Catholic social thought tradition and its application depends on correctly understanding the fundamental difference between non-negotiable moral principles on the one hand and prudential judgments on the other. So tell us a little bit about what the relationship between those two is and why it's important to distinguish them.
I find that's often where these things just hit the shoals. Like when people are having these conversations, an example, let's say abortion, euthanasia, where the church would say, you're dealing there with intrinsically evil acts. You cannot directly kill the innocent. That's the characterization of that act. You can't do that, period. And there's no negotiation on that. It's not a matter of compromise or, well, you got your perspective, I got mine. No, they're simply wrong. Slavery, let's put it in the contemporary, context. Slavery is intrinsically evil. It's just basically wrong. Torture is intrinsically evil, et cetera. Capital punishment, the church maintains, is intrinsically evil. So those things, there's no negotiation possible. Now, within that basic moral framework, we can disagree like crazy about how best to attain certain moral ends. Let's say, for example, caring for the poor. I'm speaking very abstractly, but should every Catholic be clear that caring for the poor is a morally important thing? Yes, it seems to me. There's no negotiation like, well, you care for the poor. I don't. That's just not my thing.
Yeah.
Well, no. But now, how do you best care for the poor? All of my life, there's been this huge debate, let's say, between those who would say it's through, government and social programs, and it's through economic redistribution of the wealth and so on. That's the best way to help the poor. And then call it the Reaganite sort of argument. No, it's by fostering investment and making the economy stronger that in the long run, or think of Jack Kemp, maybe people don't remember him, but called bleeding heart conservatism, because he felt the best way to help the poor, the bleeding heart side, was a conservative social program, to investment, or what do they call them, enterprise zones in cities and all of that. Okay, my point is that's a matter of prudential judgment. You could have a Democrat Catholic, a Republican Catholic, I'm not saying Democrat, Republican, whatever, and they could have a very good spirited debate about that. What's the best way to help the poor? Fine. And the church should not be interfering in that if you want.
Yeah.
That's a prudential conversation. And, look, I would leave it to economists and social planners and mayors of cities and all that. I don't know. I don't know the best way to help the poor of Chicago. I'm not a social activist. I'm not a politician. I'm not the mayor of Chicago. So that debate can be had, and that's fine. That's fine. So, but if you blur those lines, then you get into trouble, it seems to me, where you start saying, no, things like abortion, that's a matter of prudential judgment. No, it's not. Or euthanasia. No, it's not. So anyway, I think a lot of the conversations do get hamstrung because we blur that distinction.
All right, we're going to go ahead and end it there. If you want to watch the rest of this conversation, I will have a link for this video in the description below. So it's really interesting. What I'm kind of intuiting that is being said is basically this idea that on the left side of things, the leftists, they might have a good purpose, a utopian purpose of progressing towards a better society. But if you aren't dealing with the root cause of sin and ultimately our need for salvation, you're not actually dealing with the root issue. And they also seem, from what Bishop Barron is saying, to kind of say that sin is isolated to a particular, group of people, i.e. the conservatives. I wrote, not only is sin universal, it also affects every area of our lives. Many people think that sin is a religion issue, but really it's a cultural and a political issue. So on the other side, on the conservative side, what I hear them saying is that, and I think he made the comparison between a Russell Kirk view and a libertarian view. I'm not sure exactly what he said there, but what I think he's getting at is this idea that, or a Nietzschean conservatism, that would basically put all the autonomy on the individual with no kind of felt common good, no sense of responsibility for the other people within a society. And both of these viewpoints are polarized, both of them are extreme, and both of them do not lead to the common good that they're talking about. Now, I figured it would be good to provide a definition of the common good. This is from Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. It says, in ordinary political discourse, the common good refers to those facilities, whether material, cultural, or institutional, that the members of community provide to all members in order to fulfill a relational obligation that all have to care for certain interests that they have in common. So it refers to those faculties. So material, like our possessions; cultural, like I guess you could say establishing societies, providing culture, art, I don't know; institutions like schools, churches, things like that. That all of these members have a relational obligation. So we're all tied together in some sort, and we have to care for the certain interests of everybody. So we can't just be out for our own interests, but we have to be out for the interests of others. That sounds very, very Christian, doesn't it? That sounds a lot like the golden rule that Jesus taught. And so, yeah, this was a very interesting conversation. Let me know what you think about it in the comments below. Man, I wish, one thing that as I've been studying more Catholic understandings on political philosophy, I really do find the Catholic position to be, traditional where it needs to be, and also open where it needs to be open. And we just need more of that in our country. All right, that's all I have for this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe. Remember that Christianity is Christ. Without Christ, there is no Christianity. See you in the next one. Peace.